Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to join us in this webinar on the future of the fuel station. Rather timely in the sense that today we celebrate Earth Day and the climate agenda that is firmly on the front of your newspapers this morning, with the US virtual summit and Boris Johnson's announcements as to the reduction of carbon emissions that came earlier this week. So incredibly timely, and we're really excited to bring this webinar to you. We've got a great panel of speakers today, and what we wanted to talk about was not necessarily give you all the answers as to what to expect from fuel stations in the future, but give you some ideas as to where the industry may be going, what you can look for, and actually, when it comes down to it, how to invest and where to invest. This session is being recorded so that those that can't attend can also view it afterwards, but we will also circulate it to those attendees as well, so you can see it after the event. We are going to operate as a panel discussion, so you may want to put your settings on gallery view as opposed to speaker view, so you can see all of the panel members at each point. But on that note, I'm going to let each of the panel members introduce themselves, and Adam, perhaps if I could let you go first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ruth. So I'm a director of Barber Wadlow. We are a firm of business and property advisors servicing the forecourt and roadside retail sectors. We're chartered surveyors by trade, but our expertise extends to business transactions of all sizes, advising on buy and sell side, property investment and development advice, as well as professional services, valuations, lease consultancy, etc. We're UK-wide, and we act for a range of operators, investors, and lenders into the space. And we're also actively involved in the emerging EV market.
Thank you, Adam. Tom.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me. So yeah, just to introduce myself, my name is Tom Hurst. I'm the UK lead for Fastned, and my day job is as Network Development Manager, which is really around locations acquisition. So I think it's useful just for the audience just to see this one slide, because it describes in one picture what we do. So what you see here is what we build and operate. We invest, we build, we operate what I call petrol stations, but for electric vehicles. So these are high power charging sites with multiple chargers, where any car on the market, whether it's a Tesla, or a BMW, or a Nissan, a Porsche, etc., they can all charge with us as quickly as possible and get on the go again. And just to note that this is our sort of smallest module. We grow these and we can scale them in multiple directions so that we grow as the market needs and as the site location constraints might require as well. But I'll leave that there for now.
Thank you. And Warren, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, so I'm Warren Percival. I'm a director at RSK Group. We're one of the largest environmental consultancies certainly in the UK, if not in Europe. We provide pragmatic advice on a wide range of sustainability, environment and engineering-led solutions to quite a broad spectrum of clients and sectors. For those that are relevant to the audience here and the topic, certainly working with traditional oil and gas companies from a all the way down to a downstream and retail perspective, EV providers, developers, and those in the renewable energy space, both domestically and across 37 countries.
Perfect. And last but not least, my colleague Lisa-Marie Kennedy.
Hello, thanks, Ruth. As Ruth said, I'm Lisa-Marie Kennedy. I'm a lawyer and principal associate in Mills Reeve's real estate group, and I have a particular focus and experience in the fuel station sector.
So the way in which we're going to operate today is I came up with a couple of key questions for our panelists, and they're going to debate, subject to my interruptions or questions if needed, between them, various topics that we think would be interest to investors. And I'm going to start off with the overview, which is a lot of people have looked at the EV space. There's a lot in the news about range anxiety for consumers, and actually what comes first, the infrastructure or the consumer demand. So my first question to the panel is EV charging going to be an evolution or a revolution? Perhaps, Tom, if I start with you, given your possible preference.
Sure. So yeah, I think it's worth noting that actually Fastned, we've been operational since 2012. We started in the Netherlands. We now operate in 5 countries. We're building a network of 1,000 stations across Europe, but it's a case of following the market. I think we talk about evolution versus revolution. I think we are in an exponentially growing market, and the thing with an exponential market, or anything of exponential growth, is initially it can appear incremental, it can appear small, it can appear linear. But as we learned over the last 12 months, or to all of our detriment, exponential growth can really surprise us very quickly. You go from 0 to 1 very quickly. And if I had to give an example of that in terms of the EV story, when I joined Fastned in 2017, our busiest station in the Netherlands had 2 chargers on it, and it was serving 10 cars a day, and everyone was super excited because this was great. This is just fantastic. Just less than 2 years later, that station had 8 chargers. It was serving over 200 cars a day and continuing to grow. It still continues to grow. And so, I mean, it's worth noting that the EV market in the Netherlands is maybe 2 or 3 years ahead of here, but that is a similar story that we're going to see now. In the UK, we're actually leapfrogging much of the older EV stock, which found its way to the initial leaders in EVs. So the Netherlands, Norway, for example. The EVs that are hitting the road here today, the Volkswagen models, the ID3, ID4, these are all much more mass market prices, huge ranges, large batteries, and they're being picked up by people who are no longer the early adopters, who are happy to deal with the foibles of a new technology. These are people who are going about their lives, and they want a car that's reliable. And these are the cars that are coming to market for them now. So expectations change. Everything will change a lot more quickly than people realize, I think, here in this country.
And I think also following on from that, how important is regulation and policy? So as I say, the news of Earth Day today, do you think that will drive where we go, pun not intended, where we go in the future in terms of fuel stations? And how important is policy and regulation in, as you say, the exponential growth?
I think we like to see, we're a charge point operator, so we operate, commercially. We are, our stations break even. We're a listed business. We don't see the need for too much more regulation and policy on the charge point side of it. We very much support incentives that benefit the EV driver, allow them to get access to cars sooner. There's still a way to go for the prices of EVs to drop a bit. So any support that really pushes that forward is good news for the likes of us. It's good news for the location owners who get more vehicles to their sites sooner and drive the traffic and all the benefits that flow from those users.
And Adam and Warren, what are you seeing this as a evolution of revolution? Are we moving away from our traditional fuel station anytime soon? Do
you want me to pick that one up?
Yeah, after you, Adam.
Okay. I think very much evolution in terms of what we're seeing in our market. I mean, if you look at the bare facts at the moment, whilst obviously there is scope for it to grow, it really has to, in the fact that at the moment we've got 200,000 pure EVs on UK roads in a national car park of 38 million vehicles. Putting simply, the electrical vehicle product that's available at the moment just isn't good enough to command a revolution. As I think Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal, once said, that for a product to dominate a marketplace, it needs to be 10 times better than the incumbent product. It can't just be 20% better. And if we do actually think about the electric cars that are available today, whilst it is improving fast, they're most probably not even as good as petrol and diesel cars. So those are the facts in terms of where we stand today. But EV technology will improve, and if we think back 5 years and what was available in the marketplace, it has improved no end. The charging infrastructure will also improve, and that's where petrol stations have an opportunity to fill in the gap in that respect. And then finally, on Earth Day, we've also got the green agenda, which is inevitably going to push the concept forward. And that's obviously been exaggerated or increased in the last 12 months as well. But for the forecourt sector, they shouldn't be scared. It's just another chapter in the perpetual evolution of petrol stations. We have to think that in the last 20 years, cars have become 50% more efficient anyway. So we've been selling a product with diminishing demand anyway over the last 20, 30 years. And the supermarkets have increased competition. They account for nearly 50% of our marketplace in terms of selling fuel. So again, it's a very, very competitive landscape there. And as a consequence, petrol stations have diversified into all of these other sectors, convenience retailing and the like. More recently, we've seen the explosion of online retailing, and the petrol stations have actually acted as an integral part of the distribution network for online retailing. So we're not talking last mile logistics, we're talking last 100 yards. MFG, largest independent retailer in the UK, they are the largest C-store retailer for delivery. But these are all things that sort of fit into the evolution of petrol stations alongside the evolution of charging. It'll happen, just not immediate.
Yeah, I mean, jump in on that one as well. I think Adam's right that it is an evolution. I think for some operators, it's going to be a stark change. It might well be a revolution for some operators out there that aren't keeping pace with the change. But when we talk about the rate of change, just because we're experiencing potentially an exponential growth in the EV market, or what's commonly referred to as low to zero carbon vehicles, that doesn't mean that it isn't an evolutionary change, and there are lots of push and pull factors, not least the government banning the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles from 2030, and they brought that date forward. And yesterday with the Prime Minister announcing full support and incorporation of the recommendations from the Committee on Climate Change, CCC's 6 carbon budget yesterday, is a massive change, and really helps to kind of push and accelerate, the rate of change that we're going to see over the next few years. And if we're looking at that point of 2030, which is in everyone's minds, seems like a long way away, but actually we'll be in May in 2021 very soon. It felt like it was only yesterday that it was kind of the start of the COVID pandemic in 2020. So things will change very quickly. And when you look at those factors that are pushing, the CCC report actually does make reference to a number of different stats across that time horizon. We're going to need around about 150,000 charge points by 2025. 275,000 by 2030, 400,000 by 2035. These are enormous numbers, as are, potentially quoting the need or the ability to have around about 28 million EV vehicles on the road by 2035. Now, even if that is a dramatic exaggeration in comparison to what you're looking at, Adam's already quoted, we're currently at just over 30 odd million vehicles of cars on the road at the moment. So even if it was far less and it was 10 million vehicles, do you want to preclude your station from having access to a third of the market? And the answer is no. And that's where the evolution comes from any intelligent client, operator, asset owner who's looking at those changes in customer patterns and behaviors as to where's the next opportunity for us as investors or as developers. And the last point really on that, in terms of your point, Ruth, about the broader regulatory environment, it isn't just what could be perceived as the green agenda and a move because of climate change, albeit it's a huge issue that we've all got to tackle. And I'm talking as an chartered environmentalist here, but actually it was also yesterday that the South London coroner produced a report that was widely distributed on the case of the poor girl a few years ago that died. That was linked, her death was directly linked to poor air quality in her area. Now, we've got the Environment Bill that it's due for its third reading, probably in Parliament around autumn time. There's a real opportunity and there's a bit of a groundswell from an air quality perspective to look at moving and accelerating EV or low to zero carbon vehicles and a shift away from the more polluting vehicles from a health economics perspective, not just purely from a climate perspective. So there's lots of push and pull factors. And I think, we're probably going to see a further evolution and maybe a more acceleration as the next few years go by.
I think it's an interesting one that you raised the report, and it's saddening news yesterday to hear about that report. And I think sometimes the health benefits do get lost Certainly Birmingham's moving to a clean air zone in June 2021, but we were delayed because of everything that was going on in the world. But it's all these factors that are starting to build up to consumers are demanding this better quality in terms of climate and their own health. It was remiss of me at the start. I know some of you have found the Q&A function at the bottom. Please do put your questions in. We're saving time at the end to put questions. Nobody can see them, only we can see them. And if we don't raise your questions during this session, we will follow up with you separately as well. So thank you for those that are already raising the questions. It was a good reminder. So we're talking about these push and pull factors, and as you quite rightly said, Warren, let's be honest, we're all here because that we're looking at the investment opportunities. How do we make our product and services better and more efficient and more value? How do we add value? And my fuel station is one of the ones that's got delivery on, which surprised the hell out of me recently, but that was great. So my next question to the panel is, you're either own a fuel station now or you're looking to invest in a fuel station and you're looking at EV charging. As a panel, what do you see are the opportunities and what to look out for? Because we've talked about the fact that this change is coming, but how do you get yourself on that curve? I think it's an interesting point, and Tom, it may be more for you, but technology has changed, and as Adam touched upon, where we had chargers before are not the places that we have chargers now, and perhaps our thinking needs to evolve on that front. So that's my question to the panel. I have a fuel station, I'm looking to invest. What do I need to think about?
Can I kick that one off? I mean, pardon me. I think in general, for existing sites in the right locations with some space available, there's going to be some opportunity for infill as a bit of a quick win, perhaps. I will note that what quite often we see is that petrol filling station operators, they generally value a car parking bay more than they value a charging bay. And so, there are quite a few times, I mean, there's one particular PFS operator where I now literally, I look for the bins every time I go to a new station to try and find the charger, because that's where they seem to end up. And that's not just, I won't pass judgment entirely, because it comes down to safety clearances, it comes down to grid availability and all those sorts of things. But it's very possible that sort of investment is not really worth it, because you don't get the kind of customer engagement that you're looking for. So in general, then it's, if you're a relatively constrained site, it's time to start thinking about, when is your next infrastructure refresh happening? When are you due to spruce things up? Can you plan some form of strategic investment to capitalize on a changing market? As Adam's already said, this isn't going, the petrol market isn't going away anytime soon. So how do you split these things? Then on the EV charging side in general as well, I think I just note that this is a demand-led business. Investing in the proper infrastructure for this is capital hungry. So the question you also need to ask is, what is my risk tolerance? What are my reserves like? How keen am I to invest myself? Is there a partner route I can go down? Is there a tenant I can take on that will do this for me? It's a balance, because the less you invest or the less stake you take, the less you stand to make from it. But of course, you're less exposed as well. So then you just need to make sure that what you're investing in, or the strategy you take, is one that leads to quality customer experiences. And that's something I always need to emphasize, because that is how you build goodwill on your site. That's how you build value and long-term security for your location, because this will be in various places that these sites are built properly. These are the sites that customers in the region and the locality will be engaging with for the next decades.
I mean, Adam, are you seeing anything like that? Because certainly what was occurring to me, and Tom's story does make me chuckle, that the look for the bins. But even with faster charge, it's still not going to be the same speed of refueling as we have at the moment. What's your thoughts on sort of investment opportunities?
Yeah, look, I mean, when I tell people what I do for a living, buying and selling petrol stations, they assume that I'm going to be unemployed very quickly with EVs being rolled out. But the reality is that electric vehicle rollout and the charging infrastructure is going to require real estate, and it's going to require the best quality real estate in order to enable that to happen. And we just have to appreciate the qualities of petrol stations, and the fact that if you do own a petrol station, you most probably own the prime retail pitch from a motorist perspective in any particular area. Just appreciate the fact that we've had a sort of complete Darwinism moment with petrol stations over the last 50 years. There were 44,000 of them in the 1960s, and we're now down to 8,500. The best have survived. So forecourts are already designed to accommodate the motorist. There's parking spaces, there's circulation spaces, they're visible, they're accessible. So it's only natural that you can then look to incorporate EV charging onto your site. The good thing for petrol retailers standing here today is the fact that going first isn't always best. And we've seen a lot of EV charging being rolled out in the last 10 years, which just quite honestly, in the next 10 years, will largely be obsolete. They're poor quality chargers in terms of the wrong locations, and they're not sort of compatible with the real estate that they sit within. 88% of chargers out there today are 22 kilowatt hour and below. So it's going to take you at least 4 hours to charge your car. There is only so many hours in a day that you want to spend in Aldi. And so it's about making sure that within your real estate, within your petrol station, you're investing in the right charging infrastructure. Don't just focus on the rent that an operator is prepared to pay. Focus on, the offer that is being provided. Is it future-proofed? Will it stand the test of time? But you've also got to make sure that you're not killing the baby in terms of you've got a very good business there at the moment. Dual fueling is going to be part of the concept. It's going to be needed to be the concept as we bridge the gap between now and net zero.
I mean, Warren, I don't know whether you've seen anything from your side as to are people looking for different things? And Lisa-Marie, from a legal perspective, actually, how do we future-proof? So there's the two things that go hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, from our side, I mean, generally when we're advising either investors or those with a portfolio, it could be any one of the IOCs or other operators out there across all our territories. We generally in the past have been looking at whether it's due diligence for acquiring or divesting portfolios, that technical due diligence, be it environment, health, safety, or other like M&E, is typically focused on the risk in a transaction and monetizing that risk and helping either the vendor maximize the value of their assets before they come to market, or protect the new acquirer to negotiate a price chip or work with you and the legal team for any complex indemnities that need to be agreed for the SPA. But actually, we've seen the rise of what I call an intelligent client, really looking at those value creation opportunities. And I think that's really been pushed by the fact that environment, social governance issues, ESG, have started to rise up the corporate agenda, not just from a private equity perspective, but infrastructure investors, institutional investors, the rise of shareholder activism. So that value creation piece pinned to ESG, I think, is what operators of these kinds of assets really need to look at, because it now gives us an opportunity not just look at the risk, but actually say, well, the sites that we've got within the portfolio as an operator looking to develop or sell or acquire, what have we got there? So I would say, opportunities to run some kind of optioneering exercise. What have you got in the portfolio? What's really performing exceptionally well? Like Adam referred to, petrol and diesel is not going away anytime soon. There are some massive pressures on an enhancement of low to zero carbon vehicles and the alternative fuels market. But there will still be a large proportion of people that have to drive because they can't find the capital to invest in a new vehicle, or all sorts of different reasons, maybe lack of availability, will still need to use petrol and diesel vehicles. So look at that portfolio, look at what's actually going to be retained because it's just in such a good position in the marketplace. It's never going to be anything other than a petrol or diesel forecourt. But maybe there are others where actually the operator might say, this site is too constrained from space because it's high street type environment for us to even consider a single EV charging unit, let alone a bank of rapid chargers. So do they continue as is? Do they look at redeveloping that site, doing a tank pull and dramatically changing the site to be from a real estate perspective or to full EV, similar to a Fastned type approach? Or do they look at the portfolio and say, actually, within our portfolio, we have a number of assets that may be on major trunk roads or on the motorway service network, or they've got real estate in the portfolio that actually, with a bit of clever planning, they may be able to use a larger bank of estate there to develop something that becomes more of a, I suppose, becomes more of a destination than just a pit stop. You know, there are lots of facilities we've all been to over the years that you just want to go in, pick up a snack, de-water,
Hey, go.
fill the car up and disappear quick, you know. So maybe changing of that product and as I say, maybe being more of a destination really opens up that value creation opportunity to look at leisure, to look at retail, to look at potentially what the office of the future might also look like. I'm not saying every forecourt is going to turn into a multidisciplinary type offer, but you know, that optioneering exercise gives the client the opportunity to look at what's actually in front of them to create value now and in the future, and what actually they want to dispose of before it becomes a bit of a fire sale.
Yeah.
But maybe Lisa can come in on that as well with on the legal aspects as well, because you know, contractually there are a whole raft of issues that I'm not privy to because I'm not a lawyer, that I'm sure are fundamental to shifting this type of products.
Yeah, I think it is worth touching on those, because actually, Ruth, you did say, you know, in the question what to look out for, and as the whole panel have said, you know, there's a kind of wide variety of sites. There might be smaller sites with a couple of charging units, in town, out of town, on the side of a motorway. But actually, there are legal considerations that, as part of picking, as Adam said, you know, the best quality sites, you know, doing a check on those things. So, for example, how is the site owned and controlled? Like your title structure. Is it a fully let out site? Is it a multi-let site? Actually, might the EV charging points go on common areas? Think about title restrictions. Just make sure there's no covenants with regard, you know, the supply of electricity. If it's a long leasehold site, that's how it's held. Look at the leasehold covenants. Do you need a landlord's consent to underlay or to alter? Is the site charged? So do you need a lender's consent? Another title point, will there need to be new deeds of easement, new way leaves to ensure that the electricity gets supplied to the EV charging points? Linked to the supply of electricity, is the consent of the distribution network operator required? In short, that will depend on the number and the size of the chargers, and also the existing capacity at the site. Another very important point is the document governing you know, the EV charging operator's occupational site, which will invariably be a lease. So, you know, giving real thought to the terms of that lease, speaking to your advisory team about it, you know, especially if this is going to be a 15 or 20 year lease, particular thought given to reinstatement at the end of the term of the equipment, rent review. Will it be on, you know, will the charging operator want to impose their form of lease? Will a landlord want to use theirs? Especially so if it's a multi-let site, to make sure you know, it fits in harmoniously with the other leases and the other occupiers. Planning, of course, is a permitted development for the number you're looking at and the size, or will actually will a new application be needed? And then there's also legislation which governs the use of charging points. So there's the alternative fuels infrastructure regulations, health and safety, electricity supply regulations. So yeah, as well as thinking about, you know, best sites, and as you say, looking at portfolios as a whole and looking for opportunities, always worth you know, whistling through those legal points as well. So yeah, lots to think about when
just pick up on that point, Lisa-Marie, on the issue around planning. You know, making sure that there's obviously a lot of supplementary support that's required on that if it's not permitted development, you know, and we've seen, you know, there's in terms of actually getting things through planning at the moment, even for the most basic of sites, you know, is quite an arduous task, and that kind of linked to the opportunity assessment there. You know, you mentioned supply of electricity there, making sure you've got the right size and there's enough scale within not just the curtilage of the site to develop, you know, for future use and any additional offer to add value, but also if you're looking purely at EV as a destination to then help facilitate footfall into other areas that are going to be revenue generating, then you need to be sure that that supply is of a good quality and there's enough headroom in there to extend that. And I'm sure, that these are issues that I'm sure as an operator, Tom comes across time and time again. Have you got the right supply? How scalable is that existing facility? If everyone's going to be driving EV, how do you do that without incurring an excessive cost further down the line because there's no decent supply or there's no substation adjacent to give you the size that you need for the site?
Indeed, I think, frankly, I just want to sort of give a big applause to both of you there, Lisa-Marie and Warren, because you've perfectly summarized the issues and considerations for rolling out EV infrastructure. So for all attendees, go back to the transcript or when you watch the video later, just check that out, because you couldn't ask for a better independent overview of what you need to be looking for. Nothing to add.
I think it's an interesting one, because when we started planning this, we talked about I think the phrase, I think Warren, it was possibly, or Adam, it was one of yours, turning dirt into value. But essentially that what I'm hearing is looking for that opportunity, start looking forward now, look at what the possibilities are, and making sure that from a Lisa-Marie real estate perspective, you're not doing something, if with my lawyer hat on, that actually stops you or precludes you from doing something with a site later on. So you've always got to have one eye to the future, even if you're not ready to invest potentially at this particular point. And on that sort of note, I'm noticing questions are coming in thick and fast. So I just wanted to round off in terms of my questions as to a quick one for the panel. If I was asking you for your top tip when looking at investing in EV charging, what would that be? Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Tom?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly,
other than use Fastned, obviously.
Yeah, obviously, but yeah, there are other operators out there. But whatever you do, I think it's absolutely key, and this is our approach as well, that priority one has to be the customer experience. Every decision you make, every consideration has to be around how will customers interact with this facility, with this infrastructure, with my location, with my brand. And if you don't get that right, you've got a white elephant. If you get it right, you're building incredible value. I think that's right. I'll be a little bit cheeky and add on the scalability point as well, which Warren mentioned. Generally speaking, particularly if we're talking greenfield, new build stuff, yeah, you can build 20 or 30 high power chargers from day one if you like, but that's a lot of depreciating assets with high maintenance costs. If you build it right with the right kind of scalability in there as part of your expansion strategy, then that's how you make this infrastructure and this business model sing. So definitely consider that.
Yeah, well, from my side, I'd say I've got a vested interest of saying get the right advisors on board, but it goes without saying for any investment, or review. And I think having the right advisors, whether it's technical, environment, legal, whatever shape that forms, getting the right advisors on board that've got experience and thinking about what those value creation opportunities is absolutely vital, rather than just looking at it from a risk profile perspective. And I would say if you are an operator of a number of sites and you think whether it's pure retail or it's just, or you've got a portfolio of real estate that you're looking to redeploy, then really do think about what are the optioneering opportunities for those sites. Is it retail? Is it leisure? Is it assigned to an EV point? Are you going to, dispose of a number of those sites for other reasons? The opportunity is vast in front of us, but you've got to get the right advice and really understand, I suppose, have in your own mind a view as to where you're going on that journey. I've noticed a couple of questions in the session, the section that on Q&A that was talking about, so have we got enough natural resources to create?
Absolutely.
I don't know is my honest answer. I'm not a geologist. We've got a few hundred geologists in the group, but I suppose to some degree that is definitely an issue, but it's not something that I or Tom or Lisa-Marie can solve at this point. What we can say with some degree of certainty, though, is that the government has already set the bar. There will be no more petrol and diesel vehicles manufactured or sold in this country from 2030, with some nuances there for plug-in hybrids, but that the time will be short after that as well. That bar's already been set. So I think, we just need to now start thinking about what are we going to do, what's in front of us, how we're going to deal with it.
Okay, I've got a few tips. The first one is for petrol retailers and owners of petrol stations is don't necessarily stop what you're doing at this moment in time. You've all got tremendously strong businesses, and fuel sales, the tail of petrol and diesel will be quite long. It'll have to be able to bridge that gap. McKinsey forecast that by 2030, 80% of cars will still require petrol and diesel of some kind. And then 2035, that goes to 60%. So the sector has a fair runway in relation to one element of its business, which is fuel sales. But as we've discussed earlier, they're obviously very well diversified businesses anyway. The second point really is that just appreciate that the EV market is like the Wild West at the moment. It's finding its feet, and it's a complete space race out there with people trying to secure sites everywhere. And they will be trying to secure space on your forecourt for their own gains and not necessarily the right property decisions for you. So there's bad property decisions being made, and that kit could become obsolete very, very quickly. And you may have committed to a long-term contract. The other thing is that what kit is actually going to be put onto these sites, onto your forecourt, is really, really important. You wouldn't go and buy a petrol pump that takes 10 times as long to fill a car as your competitor's site just down the road. And the same absolutely applies to EV charging. The problem at the moment is that it's such a new concept, we don't always necessarily appreciate the nuances, which can be absolutely massive in that respect. But then finally, and picking up Ruth, I think, and Lisa, what you're saying earlier as well, is that real estate, unfortunately, development and property that goes with it is incredibly slow in terms of progressing things, and so much slower than the rollout of other new concepts in the wider world, including the sort of the galloping beast that is EV maybe. But we are it is absolutely integral part of the rollout of EV is real estate. And so it's thinking about the opportunities now. It might not be you do something now, but the things and decisions that you're going to make over the next 5-10 years are what you need to consider in any new development within your site. But let's also just not forget the fact that electric cars could be the bridge to a net zero world, which may be hydrogen or other forms of energy, and that we just don't know. That's the future. EV wasn't really knocking around 5-10 years ago in any form. Maybe hydrogen will be in 5-10 years.
I think that, yeah, and that sort of picks up on a theme, and Lisa-Marie, I'll come to sort of your top tip, as it were. But the questions are very much coming in around actually what's the technology and how do I future-proof? And Tom can probably talk to that when we answer questions, but it's almost like, well, which one do I go for? And as somebody quite rightly said, what's the risk of a Betamax situation? We don't have those universal standards as yet. But Lisa-Marie, just to sort of round off, what would your top tip be?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo Warren in particular when we're talking about looking at sites. It's early conversations with your teams of advisors, especially when you're reviewing opportunities. And then I suppose other tip, when a deal is done, when there's going to be a relationship between a site owner and an operator, it's given careful thought to the terms upon which that will be documented, and the lease in particular. Making sure, I think Adam used the word future-proofing earlier. It's changing technology. It's all new. It's emerging. So it's just making sure that how you document that relationship going forward is it works for all the parties. That'd be my tip.
So certainly my takeaway from it is that being blunt, there is no one answer to this. We're all finding our way, but the best way to do it is make sure that you've got as much flexibility and forethought. And being blunt, I'm not promoting any advisors, just saying, but that actually you have the right advice in place, and you start thinking forward. Future planning is crucial to this. We've had some great questions coming in, so thank you to you all. I'll just pick up on a few, but rest assured that particularly where there's specific questions for panels, we will pick them up. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are concerned about the availability of electricity for this. If we go down the EV charging route, I know there's been questions as to, can the grid cope? I suspect, Tom, that's probably one that you guys are looking at, let alone how you connect into the grid.
Yep. Well, certainly grid is everything. An EV filling station is nothing without grid. On a national level, in terms of generation and distribution and transmission, National Grid themselves have said they have no issues with any of the forecasts they've made for EV uptake. So they've got some very aggressive scenarios. Based on us meeting our targets and societal change basically, and the grid can handle it. The big thing is, can the local distribution grids handle that? And actually, indeed, on your local street, for example, most of them can't make it right now. So the distribution network operators themselves are working very hard to upgrade a lot of infrastructure, but it's not always going to be doable, or you're not going to be able to get a decent sized grid connection to every house, for example. Where it gets a bit different is on the 11,000 volt level and above. So the higher voltage levels, there's generally, where there's capacity, there's the grid can take it. That's not a problem. It's relatively affordable. It's also, sorry if you can hear someone's drilling outside my office, I apologize. There's no impact on the wider grid. If you go via your own independent substation, you don't impact your neighbors, they don't impact you. And in that regard, it's very, very powerful. Now, I think the questions about future-proofing are, the secret to that is grid. Get as much affordable capacity as you can for your location, basically, because that is an investment in the future of your site. And we talk about the Betamax scenario, for example. Thankfully, in Europe, the industry is very much standardizing on a charging plug technology called CCS, basically. It's now used on Teslas. It's used on all the European manufacturers' vehicles, the Japanese, the Koreans, and indeed the Chinese, with the exception of Nissan, but it will be CCS from 2022 onwards. However, if in the future something different comes along, like let's say inductive charging at high powers, the secret again is grid. Whatever the connection to the vehicle that's being charged is, it needs a large grid connection to charge at those high speeds. So you can be flexible if you've got the space for that vehicle to charge, and for some, let's say, space allowances for a cabinet or whatever else might be associated with the power conversion system, you're on the right track.
I think it's an interesting one, because I'd also heard, I was at a seminar where the National Grid said we can handle it. It's the local level that can't. And interestingly, there was a question raised by somebody in there as to what does that do in terms of alternative, how we actually get our electricity. How about sites that have got capacity for solar panels, alternative means of energy generation, which I think is quite an interesting one. But one for Adam and Warren.
That boils down to feasibility of the site, doesn't it? As we touched upon it earlier, and Adam raised a really important point actually, which is not so much the Panasonic and Betamax argument, what's going to win the day. CCC have made it abundantly clear that hydrogen has to be part of the mix. It might not be the overall endpoint, but actually when you think about other parts of the market that we've not really touched upon here, like light and heavy goods vehicles, EV at the moment just isn't necessarily for a lot of that market as scalable at the moment. It's likely to come, and everyone's investing in new technology and different options, but actually things like hydrogen seemingly seem to be the route forward, as was CNG not too long ago in terms of compressed natural gas, but they all come with their issues. Now, hydrogen in particular comes under a lot of criticism because of the way that it's created in one of two main forms, or one of two main methodologies. But the most efficient, from an environmental perspective, most efficient way of doing that is having a private wire type arrangement, or a green PPA, a green power purchase agreement that's been agreed, that links directly to your electrolyzer at point. So we're getting very technical now, but basically you need a lot of electricity to split the water to create the hydrogen. It doesn't then have a carbon molecule, so it's not got a climate issue, but then counterintuitively, you've used a lot of electricity to break the bonds and split the water to create the hydrogen. You can tell I'm not really a scientist, can't you? But the point there is, if you've got a large site, if you're a large landowner, a brownfield developer, someone who's got access to a large opportunity for maybe a solar array in the south, there's one example, being able to link that to the ability to split the water and create hydrogen and tank it, and then use it, to be used as you would in any other pump situation. That's the end of the rainbow. But those sites are possibly few and far between, but they're part of that optioneering exercise, and technology will change, but there are operators out there like ITM Power in Sheffield that have been doing a lot of work with Shell on point of use electrolyzers for hydrogen filling stations. But so with that, it's kind of part of the mix, really. But again, with that, you'd need the right advice because of planning and EIA requirements. It's quite a interesting topic.
I mean, it picks up on a couple of sort of issues that have come in as well, as to sort of, I guess, it comes back to finding that right site and where you make the investment. There's been questions also as to actually to what extent is almost like a tech refresh in the operator model, but also what role does the fuel companies play in getting the investment off the ground? Because let's be clear, there is substantial capital investment in doing this. And Tom, maybe that's one for you or one of the other panelists to, great question. IT, I'd expect a refresh. Does the same sort of concept work in EV charging?
Well, I mean, I would say, I don't want to hog the floor any more than I already have, but the international oil companies that we've worked for no longer refer to themselves as oil companies. Refer to themselves as fuel companies. They're referring to themselves as energy providers.
Yes.
Because they recognize there is an absolute shift in the marketplace. So, I think that's what we've got to consider here, is that it's about providing an energy source, whether that's energy in the form of electrical energy or whether it's in the form of chemical energy from the fuel that you put in a pump from diesel or petrol or from hydrogen. So that I suppose that's my tuppence worth, but as a lead in for Adam or Tom really on that one.
Going to sort of flip that one to Adam.
Okay, yeah. I mean, look, in terms of the oil companies and their rollout of EV across their network, I mean, they've obviously all bought EV providers and are looking to integrate with them within their forecourts. It's slow work so far. I mean, BP has started and most probably making greater progress than, say, Shell. Shell are somewhat slower. They'll get there. But I can see others most probably doing it faster and most probably better to begin with, as they have more flexibility, being smaller businesses, to team up with a variety of different operators and explore the playing field. It just goes back to the fact that it's so early days. A lot of people are going to make a lot of mistakes before we find the right solution. The first few forecourts do not look the same. 60, 70 years ago, they don't look the same as they do today. So there's going to be a lot of chopping and changing.
Absolutely. I mean, Tom, do you have anything to add to that, or
I think
echo Adam's sentiments?
Yeah, largely speaking, and certainly BP have said themselves, not every single one of their fuel stations today is going to be appropriate for EV charging, perhaps ever, mainly due to the grid constraints and the cost of bringing power to those sites. Just to note, I still don't believe that's necessarily an issue for those locations. There's still huge value in them, but it may just be a different non-fuel, non-even EV charging story. And I had another point, but it's gone, so I'll just mute myself.
And on that note, we have run 5 minutes over, but it was such an interesting discussion. I didn't want to cut it short. There are a huge number of questions, and as I say, we will come back to it. And any feedback that you have after this session is much appreciated, because I'm sure there's many topics that we could pick up on that we've only touched on in brief in this. But what we really wanted to do today was give you an overview of the sector and let's not refer to them as challenges, let's see them as opportunities. And the way to look at it is actually the more flexibility, the more we have these kind of dialogues and conversations, and being blunt, we learn as we go along, is certainly how I see the position. So firstly, I would like to thank the panel very much for their valuable contributions. It was a very insightful discussion, and also to the attendees. It is a big topic. As I say, if there's anything else you would be burning interest to hear, then please let us know. We will follow up after this session with the actual video recording, and please feel free to use any of the QR codes to link into our speakers, and there'll also be follow-up opportunities. And on that note, talking about the future, at M&R, we are launching our new campaign, which is a real estate, which is mapping the future, recognising and picking up on the themes that we've talked about, which is the way in which we live, work and move is probably going to change quite rapidly over the forthcoming few months and years, even months. I'm operating in a very short time scale here. But actually what we're looking at is a thought leadership campaign, much as we do today, but further details to that campaign will be in our email, along with other follow-up from this event. So on that note, it just leaves me to say thank you so much for attending, and thank you to my panelists.